There we go. I'm live. So let's get started to it. Just minimize it and close it up. All right. So welcome everyone. Um, the last video, like the last couple of videos, I've did about TDD and automated testing in general for UE4, and since then I've been studying the game playability system instead of building my own whole system. I figured out it might be simpler and easier to use whatever the engine already have available for us. So let's go back to the already again as again as in the past. Basically, you have to prepare your whole environment setup. So you have to add a couple dependencies on your project settings. So basically, I've modified the Build.cs file. So basically, I've added a couple more dependencies over here. So this is the dependency needed for the gameplay ability system. So before we even start, what is the gameplay ability system? Basically, is a built-in system inside of your engine that allows you to program complex um, gameplay uh, systems without needing to create all the variables and everything, like create all the logic yourself. You can already rely on the system to build, like let's suppose you're building like an RPG system. You need like skills, like you need like skill tree. You need like, I don't know, to cast a spell or to use some potions. The default gameplay system that every game, at least most of the games already, have. So you can use that to program in a simpler way that those interactions with your game, instead of building from the ground. Though it's right now, as far as I understood, it's C++ only. At least the basic config is C++ only. So that's and since I use C++, it's just fine. So, but you can do as well a lot of things in blueprints once you expose that to blueprints. But first of all, you need to open like your project and add those dependencies over your build file. So it's the gameplay ability, the gameplay tags, and gameplay tasks. So these other dependencies, you can see the first video I did to explain why I've added those. Also, you need the automated test dependencies because we're gonna have some unit tests for our components and our code itself. Um, Also, after doing that, you can compile it and it should be just fine. But on your character itself, let me just go back to the character. Of course, you can have to create everything like the component, the classes, and everything. But you have to add these libraries, like these headers as well, like the gas attributes. And let me see, there we go, the ability system interface. So you need to add that into your header file of your character, and also uh, extend your character to not be only from public, but also add this interface to it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to basically do anything regarding the ability system component. So it's something that needs to be done on C++ as well. So that's why you need like a C++ project, C++ character, and things of the sort. Besides that, you're gonna need to basically, the gameplay ability system is composed by the component itself, which is this gameplay ability component. It's not of this type, but I'll show you how to create one. Is basically you just go to the C++ classes. You can organize your folders the way you want it to. I separate it into components. I create like a folder gameplay ability system, and then I create the component over here. And the class itself, if you need to create like a new class, you can show all classes and search for gameplay ability component. Oops. Gameplay ability. Where is it? I think that's the component, right? I think that's the name of it. Let me just check. Gameplay ability system. Sorry. So it's gameplay ability system. Where is it? Why is it not showing here anymore? Is it the whole thing on? But basically, you need to create this class, which is from the gameplay ability system. You know, it's inherited from the gameplay ability system. So if I open up like this, you can see that it's inherited from this ability system component. So I should be able to find that out. I'm not sure why I'm not finding it, but oh, there we go. It's there. So okay. So you need to create your ability system component, which is the gameplay ability system component itself. But the component itself, it's not going to do anything if you don't have the attributes. So you need to, the component itself is going to manage uh, which ability your character should have, when you should, you know, activate an ability or deactivate it, if you should commit the ability to commit, which basically is decrease some, you know, for example, commit would be apply the effect of the cost, actually, sorry, not the effect, apply the cost of that ability. So the commit would be like, let's suppose you spell, like you cast a spell and that spell costs 10 of mana or something like that. To actually apply that cost to your character, you need to commit before. But yeah, basically the whole ability system is managed by the component itself. So I create like a one called gas component. So that's my class. Also, I need the attributes itself, which is basically the character attributes. So in the last video, I did basically um, a health component. So you wouldn't need like a health component because that's like a you know status, like an attribute that I could store inside of my gameplay ability system. Instead of, you know, storing like a local variable or something of the sort, I could store every single character attributes inside of those uh, that attribute class. And that attribute class, it's from the attribute set class. So if you search it up for that, once creating your a new class, you should see like this attribute set. Uh, this is an example like of attributes, but basically, you know, those are the main, at least the main things that you need to create to start uh, interact with the ability system component. So basically, inside of your character, you're gonna add the interface to it. And let me just delete this new line because I don't need it. But and once you add the interface to it, you can just declare your component, like your gameplay ability component. You can name it whatever you want. I name gas component when I create the C++ class. And you need to create the attributes itself, which is, you know, all the character attributes stored at one single place. So the health, mana, stamina, strength, and everything of the sort. Yeah, so now going back to those, you know, root, like the bare bones of the gameplay ability system, on the attributes, once I created that, I need also to include the ability system component. Otherwise, if I need to interact with it, I might not be able to, you know, do anything with it. But I think that might be already included by default. But if it isn't, just include that. Uh, Also, this is a macro that is inside of the U attribute set. So instead, because if you see the Epic Games video of, you know, there's like a 3-hour video explaining it, like the bare bones of it, which is really great. I highly recommend it for you guys to see it. But if you see that video, you see that he kind of set for each one of the attributes that we are going to specify for the character, he creates like 3 different lines, like 3 or 4 macros in order to, you know, as uh, configure the getters and the setters for those attributes. Instead of doing so, I highly recommend it to you to just open up the EU attribute set, and somewhere in between here, you're gonna see that there's an example like of the macro. I think it's gonna, there we go. So there's an example of the macro. Instead of you adding all of that boilerplate code, like 4 lines, you can add like just one single line by defining this macro. And, you know, it should be simpler than, you know, adding 4 lines as they do on that video. So basically, I copied over that macro over here. So it's just a matter of copying over. No need like a boilerplate code. There's no need to alter anything on here. And on my class itself, I just created a constructor. And I'll go into those functions in a bit, but then I kind of declare uh, the attributes itself. But also, I've left not attributes, but then that's like a personal choice of mine. It doesn't need to be yours, but I've created like float variables as well inside of it, so I can add it later into the engine, like what should be my max health, what should be my max values of each attribute that I have it. If you set it up like add it anywhere, nef gameplay attribute data, which is basically the kind of variable you're gonna use for each attribute of your character, you're not going to be able to manually add it like through the editor unless you do some blueprint coding or setting on the constructor or whatever. So I found that it's a bit easier to manipulate the maximum amount of data just by typing into the editor. Like any level design could just open the default class settings of the character, and he would see like what should be the max amount of health for the enemy, or for that enemy, or for that character specific. So those I just set it up like is a max health, max strength, and max for each one of the attributes that I'm gonna show you how to specify in a moment. So those are just flow variables. You should be equal like any other sort of uh, coding that you might be already used to. But the properties itself from the gameplay ability system is this gameplay attribute data. So that's the type of variable. I know it doesn't sound like really user friendly, but really what it simply is like you set it up like a float value, like a like set it up like a value for that attribute into your character, and that's it. Basically, it's simple. As simple as that. And then we use that macro that we created at the top of it to kind of set it up all the setters and getters for our attribute. So we don't need to, if you see the Epic games of it, you're going to see that he writes, I think, 4 lines for each one of the attributes. I think it's just too much boilerplate code to see and, to manage. And I found that it's a bit easier to just define that attribute assessor that is going to do basically those 4 lines, but while rating, it's easier to just set up like the assessors with a single line. So you set it up, and again, if you set it up like uh, multiplayer, like replication, you're gonna need to set it up a couple different steps, like the on hap notify or something like that, or you need to specify like the do wrap. I forgot the name of the function that replicates do wrap lifetime something that does replications of your variables based on a condition if you wanted to. But I do have like another video that I might have, and I may leave it once I finish it up this streaming. I think it's Rube something, the name of the guy, and he explains on how to set it up replication for attributes as well. But since this game is not gonna be any multiplayer, it's just like a test, like a devlog test for uh, you know local, like one single player game, doesn't need any replication for it. And again, I set it up the health attribute, I set it up the strength, the stamina, the mana, or magic points, whatever, and the speed as well. And based on that, I already have, again, since I already built this, I do have also my tests. Let me just open up the private folder, the tests, and I do have like a couple, tests for the game playability system. And those tests, let me just try to. Oh, there isn't like it really easy. Oh, there we go. I knew it was easier than that. So I do have like a couple tests that I already specify for it, and those tests are basically like I need to have like a set of default, again, as I did before in the previous video for the TDD. I write my task first and then I write my code later, and in order to make my task work. But basically, I do have to have like a defined amount of for each one of those attributes while I'm spawning my player. I do have a task also for whenever I change an attribute, or my attribute should never be negative, and all those sort of tests that if you want to see how to test your code, like how to unit test or how to end-to-end test, follow up the previous video that I just presented. I just wanted to mention that there is tests for each one of the functions that I'm gonna present to you. Um, sorry, let it go. let it go and let's continue. So basically I set it up the default attributes, but I haven't set it up what should be the initial value. Again, you could set it up this for from data tables. You could set it up this from a base default gameplay effect, which I'm going to explain what it is in a couple minutes. But you could also specify into the constructor of your attributes what should be the default value for each one of the attributes that you created. And once you specify that and you set it up that attribute as into your character, those variables are going to be exposed to the gameplay ability component. And whenever you want to set the attributes or whatever, you're going to set these variables like these attributes. So if your character has more variables, just specify more of those gameplay attributes data variables. And that's pretty much it. Also, I do have like a couple other functions. And again, oops, there's a typo in here. So there we go. So this pre-gameplay effect execute, it's a function from the attribute set class that basically allows you to, before you change any attribute internal data, so before you change, like for example, cast a spell, you need to change the magic points of that character, or you need to decrease that or increase whatever. Before you actually do that, that function is going to be called, and you can basically manipulate as you want it to. So if you want to do something before changing, like make some sort of validation before it, well, that's the place to do it. Also, this post, like it's the opposite of the pre-gameplay effect execute. This post-gameplay effect execute is actually what's gonna be done after we change that attribute itself. So before changing, do some validation, and after changing, you could also do some sort of validations, or maybe let's suppose you have some sort of punch ability or something of the sort that we're gonna actually use it. On the post effect, you can actually check how much stamina your character has, and based on that, make him slower or something of the sort. So that's how you would handle, uh, you know, effects on your character before or after, or do some sort of validation before or after changing any of those attributes itself. But again, that's only regarding the app gameplay attribute data, not the floats that I specify as a maximum value. I'll just use that for maximum reference for both UI or anything of the sort, or even tests. So that's basically it. And again, I just do nothing. I just call it super because right now I'm not doing anything on the before changing attribute, but after changing the attributes, and again, I do have tests for that. I do check if I'm to check which attributes you're actually changing it. You actually just do that, grab that data, gameplay effect mod callback data variable, and you can evaluate the data, grab the attribute, and check if your attribute is actually this get your health attribute. And remember, this function I never specified, but that's actually the purpose of that handy dandy macro over here. So that specify getters and setters for us. So basically, what it does is allow me to just call it get health whatever. It's gonna present me if something like, let me just present you like get health attribute, or get health the health value, or get health attribute is gonna grab a reference for the attribute itself to check if it's if that is the attribute I'm changing. But if I want to get just the value of that attribute, I would just use like get health. And if I want to set the value of that health, I'm going to call it set health. So that's basically what that um, uh, macro is doing for the attributes itself. Also, there is the initializer, so it's initializing as well, but I never use that macro, at least not at least so far. So yeah, so basically that's how you would check which attributes you're actually manipulating, because remember, this is going to be called for every single attribute you manipulate during your game. So if you have over 4 or 5 attributes, you don't want it to change, like to do some effect based on, let's suppose you decrease the stamina. You don't want to cause an effect on the mana, on the magic point, or on the health of the character. You just want to make him slower. So you want to be sure that you're just testing and manipulating the stamina. So that's how we check that. So if I'm changing the health attribute, then I'm just be sure that I'm not I'm clamping the value to be sure that it's never negative, as I did before on the previous video. And then I'm setting if the player is alive or if he's dead. That's basically it. If the attribute is just the strength, I'm just setting the strength and be sure that all my values are never negative. And I do that for all the other attributes as well. But basically, the stamina attribute, if not only I set that as to never be negative, but I also double check if he's tired. So I do have like a requirement of if the stamina is below 10%, which is dot one value. Basically, I'm gonna make him slower until he recovers his stamina to the point of it's above 10% of stamina. So I do that basically over here. So that's how you would use like this post or pre-gameplay effect execute functions inside of each one of your attributes. So I know it sounds a bit complicated right now, but it's just a structure. So inside of your attributes, you control uh, each character attribute and how it's going to behave if that attribute changes. If you want to validate something, you're probably going to need to check here. And the component itself, it's the one that actually is going to call the ability and manage this communication. It's like an interface that it's going to manipulate your attributes, or set, basically manipulate, manage the whole attribute system. Okay, so that's about attributes, and that's okay. The ability component itself, let me just go back to let me see if I can find the constructor so I can, oh, I need to open up the character. So there we go. Um, Not only you need to specify that variable, you need to create the sub-default object in order, like anything that you kind of declare on the construct, like as a variable for a character. So not only that, I need to, let me just go back to there we go. Where is it? Oh, there we go. So the gameplay ability component, I create a sub-default object of the class I created, which is a UGAS component, as I named it. But remember, it's from that gameplay ability component system. I name it as a gameplay ability component, and the same I should do for the attributes, and that should be about it. Those are just default verb. I kind of have like a boolean to double check whether I do have the gameplay ability, like the gas active or not, so I can do something with it. If it's deactivated, I don't want to manipulate or do anything with it. So I always double check if the actual gameplay ability system is actually active or not. And yeah, that's pretty much what I have for this. But yeah, not only that, the gameplay ability component, as I mentioned, it's gonna be the one that um, it's gonna do basically manage your skills or anything of the sort. So if you open up like this, let me just go open up let me just grab the variable itself. Let me just find it on my code. Oh yeah, there we go. So whenever I'm setting up the import player component, oh sure, I forgot to mention that as well. Sorry, but you're gonna need to have, for example, for each one of your skills, you're gonna have to set it up like a key or something of the sort to actually cast that spell or cast that um, ability. So instead of my festival, like my main header file, I've created already these enum like called gas ability input ID. So if you see the Epic games, the guy actually uses like integers as how to check which, like if the uh, which ability is being activated, or to control it. I found that a bit troublesome to do. I rather to actually have keys associated with it. So what I did basically is I created this non-confirm cancel, which is basically default. But I do create my own input as well named punch. So if I want to create like a different one, like suppose your ability is gonna be named, I don't know, healing or potion or whatever. You just name as you wish here, and once you do that, uh, later on the ability system, you expose that variable to set it up, which is gonna be the key uh, responsible to activate that ability. So just to be really simple, let me show an ability really quickly to you guys. So let me just open up playable, skills, abilities, melee attack, GA, which is the gameplay ability. So if you go back, there's this ability input ID, and I set it up as a punch. Again, there's none, confirm, cancel. Later on, I'm going to expose that variable to an actual ability. So that's why you're gonna need to create that enum inside of your festival. You don't need to if you want to, manage your skills as the guy at Epic did using integers. But I found that this is a bit useful, a bit more useful than specify specific integers for it. And also, it's easier because what that bunch actually is gonna be, it's gonna be the same key you set it up on your project settings. Let me just find the input. There we go, input. So you're going to see that action mappings, I do have, uh, if you set it up like a variable here with the name punch, or you can, you need to specify with the same name inside of your input, and basically it's going to match whatever key you set it up here. So if you set it up the left mouse button, the punch is going to be, it's going to try to match what inputs you have, and if it finds like one that exact match, like the exact match for your input, it's going to use that as the input for the ability. So I found that a bit more useful than using like controlling by integers. I know it's simpler by integers, but I found that, for me it's a bit more useful doing that, because it's easier for me to control what input I'm going to actually use for my abilities than, calling by integers. So basically, whenever you set it up your player input component, and that's the default thing that comes with Epic whenever you create like a character variable or a character class, you're gonna see that it kind of binds uh, the jump action to a specific key event or whatever, like press, release, and it's gonna call like a specific function. So on the other hand, you want to, once creating like your input components as well, also specify the activation of your abilities um, to the how can I explain that? You want to specify and also set it up the inputs for your abilities based on whatever you set it up here, and whatever you set it up into your ability at the end of it. So basically what I did here is I double checked to be sure that I do have actually like an input component and also the gameplay ability component, which is my, gas component. And if that's true, which means I already have those created, then I'm casting to this gameplay ability input binds. I'm grabbing like what should be the confirm on that enum, what should be my cancel command on that enum, because your ability system, you can confirm that you casted, you can cancel a cast in the middle of a cast. So you can maybe you don't want to cast an ability if you're taking damage, you can cancel casting, you can manage that through the ability system component. And the enum name, which is basically the name of the variable that I created here, which is egas ability input ID. So each needs to match exactly over here. And the target input, which is basically the confirmation that the ability has been cast, is going to be the confirm. So you can see that here. And the cancel is going to be the cancel. So this is basically creating a bind to be sure that when I finish my casting, when I cancel, what should be the enum that I should consider to use to bind my activation or my input component to my ability gameplay ability component. So I set it up by confirm, cancel, and this is allowing me to use that custom enum as my and binding that to my activation to input component. I don't do that only here, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check here. Oh, let me just double check here. No, yeah, yeah, that's Ruben War tutorial. Sorry. If you want to do that on the multiplayer side of it, you want to do that, I think, in the post possess as well, because I think you want to only bind the activation through server or something of the sort. But yeah, I'll leave the video below as well. He used that approach, and I found that's a bit more useful than just binding integers to it. So based on that is grabbing the confirm in the console, which is basically here, and whatever I add below here, it's gonna be my custom inputs. So if I type punch, if I type, I don't know, potion or whatever, if I set it up a new input named potion here and set it up like what should be the key to activate my potion, it's gonna match exactly for me. If that's not useful for you, you might be more suitable to just use integers as the guy on the Epic Games tutorial did. But yeah. Okay, so I set it up my input, so I bind my inputs to my gameplay ability component. So which input should activate what should be activate my gameplay ability component, what should be the input components that I'm going to use for, and later on the begin play, again, if I do have both my attributes and my gameplay ability, I do initialize my gameplay ability actor info, and it asks for an owner and the avatar that is controlling that um, gameplay ability component. On this case, since my actor is actually the one that that's gonna be the owner and the avatar for it, I just specify this and this, and that should be fine. And then I set that variable as a true. And again, I set the player speed by grabbing the speed from the attributes, and there we go. Okay. Also, here on the get stamina, okay, I set it up the basic stamina. Also, I check if I do have like a variable named melee ability. That's basically my default ability, which is basically punch ability. So if you have like default abilities of a character, like maybe melee combat, or I don't know, fireball if you're a magician, or like if you're a mage or something of the sort. Uh, yeah, just like, or arrow, like bow and arrow or something of the sort. Uh, you might need to specify those default abilities as well in the begin play if you wanted to. And by given the ability, which is basically my melee ability, which is a variable here, let me just find out that variable really quickly to you. There we go, UGAS gameplay ability. Uh, I set it up that on my character, and then basically that gives the ability to my the punch ability to my character. Okay, later on as well on the apply damage function, I do need to check as well. But again, I'll go back to this in a moment. Like what should be what are effects, what are the abilities itself. I set it up a couple getters and the give ability as well. I'll explain like in a little moment once we have the whole point of what should be ability, what what are abilities, what are effects, and yeah. So basically, right now we have already the attributes covered and the gameplay ability component covered, like how to set up that bare bones of it. But now that you have your ability component system and your attributes already set, now things are starting to get a little bit more interesting because you can actually specify the abilities just by having those two. Uh, and when I meant that, it's because you can apply effects without having abilities, and you can spawn queues without that you can use that to manage C++ effects directly without even having to create those. But yeah, what are effects? What are gameplay? Like what are abilities and what are queues or basically what he has is gameplay ability system besides the attributes and the whole component itself. It's basically like in the bare bones, built on based on abilities, which are actually the abilities. Like you can imagine like a tree on your head, and the top of it you have the ability, which is like the main source of it that contains what should be the damage, what should be the effect, what should be the particle or whatever. That's the main class that's gonna have all things in it. And inside of that gameplay ability, you're gonna need to specify at least two other classes that are the gameplay effect, which is what are the effect that this ability is gonna have on whatever the target is. In the target, I mean, it could be like another player, it could be yourself, you could like apply a buff, or it could apply like I don't know, an explosion somewhere else in the environment. But yeah, and the effect, it's basically containing everything or you know that this ability is gonna the effect of the ability into the world, like what should be the attribute that I'm going to use to decrease, or what should be the calculation that I'm going to do, and inside of that effect, or the gameplay ability itself, you can specify a queue, and the queue is basically the particle, if you have, or the sound or the animation you want to play uh, for the target itself or for that ability. uh, and to create those, and I can see that I do have like a bunch of default uh, headers over here. I do have my attributes, I do have my component, and I do have, as I mentioned, the queue, effect, and the gameplay ability itself. uh, those can be created again in the C++ class components gas. You can create the gameplay ability. Let me just find the actual class of that. It's actually gameplay ability. I'm not sure why I didn't find it. Oh, it's because I haven't wrote it. So you have the gameplay ability class. Let me just found that one. Yeah, there we go. Gameplay ability. That's the class you want to create for each ability. So basically what I did, I create my own custom ability class. So I can modify the base of it to whatever my needs are. And then I can then later create blueprints based on my custom gameplay ability to, maybe specify some montages that you can for that ability to set on the editor itself instead of setting all through variables, or I can specify a data table or anything of the sort. So I create my custom gameplay ability class. Also, I create my gameplay effect. Oops, I think it's two F's. Oh, there we go. So I do have this gameplay effect. So it's basically my default gameplay effect class. So if it's gonna apply something, what I'm gonna do with my custom gameplay effect class. And I do create also two queues, which are this queue instant and this queue with timer. So if you type it up like game play queue, there we go. You're gonna have this static actor and this, yeah, that's notify static. And I think the other one, what is the other one? I forgot the name of it. So let me just go back. Yeah, there we go. So you have this static, and the timer is just the notify actor. Okay, so yeah. So queue, there we go. You have this notify actor, and you have the notify static. So one is a U object, and this notify static is basically for those sort of effects that only happens once. For example, like a heat animation, or I don't know, an explosion or an effect that's just gonna spawn and you know uh, kind of deletes itself after the spawn. It's just gonna play or a sound or anything of the sort, like a hit effect or something. So this is like for those events that's gonna happen only once in your game. And the notify actor is actually the cues or the effects that needs to be spawned, and you can actually, it's actually an actor that you can control into the world. But these are my more used for spawns that needs to, for example, buffs like potions that needs to be, or stunt or anything, any sort of effect into an enemy or a player. That, let's suppose you hit the player and he's going to be poisoned for 5 seconds. The static is not going to do that because once it's spawned, it kind of destructs itself after hits flow. But the actor can control like, okay, after 5 seconds, destroy itself. So the character is going to have that poison state into it, or that stunt, or being slow or something like that. You can control that. It's really modular. So I create my custom 2 as well for the actor. So whenever I need to spawn like a potion in the future or some buff effect, I'm gonna use that one. And the static is just for hit effects or animations or things of the sort. Okay, there are a couple other examples here, so you can control like even sounds or as a gameplay cue works. So those are my basic classes. I do have this other one that I kind of hijacked from the RPG system, but I don't quite use it actually. But it's just here, so in case later I want to use it. And to be honest with you guys, those 3 or 4 classes, they are built in C++, but there are the whole gameplay ability system after you set it up into C++ becomes more blueprint than ever. And because this is made to be user friendly, at least in my conception. So basically, you construct your custom ability. You construct, like, you build your custom queues, your custom effects, but you create like a base one, and based on that class you created, you're gonna create like a bunch of other blueprints with customizations for it. So that's at least how I felt it's been built for. So okay, let me just go back to my gameplay ability, which is basically the main class of it. So for my ability system, for each ability, I specify that the ability needs to have a montage, which is basically the animation that the ability is going to have it. So I set it as edit anywhere. I can set it up these as well through code or whatever I needed to. And the category is going to be ability. I set it up as well. My input, my custom input, again, as I mentioned, I set it up a custom variable at my default header. So I'm going to use that inside of my gameplay ability to specify what should be my input for my ability. So if I specify multiple inputs over there, I can enter my ability and into the editor just specify what should be the event or what should be the input that I set it up into that project settings to trigger that ability. So by default, it's going to be none, but you know, just saying that you can specify that way as well. I specified this as well, this wait event task. It's going to be visible anywhere. You can also write. Uh, I'm going to explain what should be event in a couple seconds, but what's the event that's going to trigger that? What should you do? Basically, each ability is going to have an event, and once that ability ends, you want to destroy that event basically. Otherwise, you might have like a bunch of actors going on into your uh, I mean, if your project is pretty simple, you might don't mind. But if it's bigger, like a multiplayer, a lot of events popping up might decrease performance. Okay, so this is like a function that I create just as a blueprint implementable event so I can set it up my anim montage for my basic ability. Remember, this is my basic ability, like my melee combat ability, like my default ability. I'm setting up to set the montage on the blueprint level because depending on what sort of weapon my character is using, it might change what type of animation, what type of melee combat I'm going to use it for. So in my case, I'm setting up like a melee combat, like a punch ability. So if I'm using like a sword, I might not, my melee attack is not going to be a punch. It's going to be like a sword attack. And if I'm using like a bow and arrow, my basic attack is going to be like an animation of someone throwing like an arrow at someone. So I need to specify like a more modular uh, animation for that. So I create this blueprint implementable to do in blueprints because it's a lot simpler than doing in C++. And I set it up like a bunch of custom events. So basically, I also have my owner, like it's like a protected, so it's not going to be used anywhere outside of this code or once casting, but it's basically using only C++ as well. So, but basically this functions over here, this virtual, which is basically overriding the gameplay ability functions, are activate ability. So what is done when I activate this ability? Once the ability is landing, what should I do? Commit, remember, commit ability is applying the cost of that ability into the owner of it. Cancel ability is what should be done once I define that ability that is being casted should be canceled. And pre-activated is basically before activating my ability, what should be like before activating the ability, what should we do? Of course, you could do that into the activate ability as well, but I do have a specific use for this pre-activate ability, which is setting up my montage, basically. So if I open up my functions, you can see that I set it up like a default montage, which is basically my punch montage. So I do have a montage somewhere here. This is like a blueprint class based on that header file, like that class that I just created. So you can see that I do have like this punch ability. Once I create that blueprint, this is already filled in for me. So I always guarantee that I would have a valid montage right at the beginning of each blueprint. But basically, this is like a simple, punch of the character itself, like it's just punching. So let me just leave it open, just in case. Uh, okay, so this is what's been doing in the constructor. I set it up as well, the default to be the punch. Uh, Now that I'm seeing, I think that I should even, delete that because there's no need for this because I'm setting the punch to be the default one. Oh, never mind. I'll leave it. Later I can delete it. Um, I'm setting it the reference for the montage, and the reference I just grab it by finding the montage itself and clicking with the right button and copy reference, and that should be about it. So if I paste it over, you can see that it's the same path. And if the ability montage is no, I'm loading that reference, like loading the montage itself, which is basically like loading an object based on the reference path. It's not ideal doing that in C++. I'm just doing to the sake of it. Okay, make sure that at least I'm gonna have like a default montage for my each ability. You can change it in the future, but at least the default is gonna be filled in. And into the pre-activated ability, I do need to grab my player itself. So if my player is actually the one that's being, casting that ability, I'm just calling my set any montage event, which is basically this any montage event, and passing the state type, like what sort of weapon my character is actually using. So I just grab it what kind of weapon I'm using, which I'm actually specified through uh, specified through uh, through the code itself. Like somewhere in my code, I specify what kind of weapon my character is using. So if I'm hit and play, right now I don't have a weapon, but right now I don't have even a weapon system actually. But once I create a weapon system, I'm gonna change that variable to I don't know, sword or shield, short sword and shield, or I don't know, bow and arrow, or something else to modify this for me. And into my ability, whenever this event is called, not this one, but the onset and montage, which is my custom event, I'm switching on my variable, like, and based on that, I can set my anim montage. And this anim montage is nothing but a random integer, so I can have some sort of variation for the punch montages as well. So basically what I did, I created like a function. I specify what sort of montages I wanted to. So I have four different sorts of montages for my punch. And I'm just, grabbing a random one. And based on that, I set my ability montage variable. And you can see that if I play, sometimes I do this punch, sometimes I do another sort of punch, sometimes I do a different one. And so I have some sort of variations of punts based on like a sort of random picking of punts as well, which gives me a little bit of variation for the melee attack, the default melee attack. So that's how I set it up, the pre-activate. So before I even activate the montage, just be sure that you have uh, um, a montage set to it, a proper montage set to it. So I add a little bit of variation with it. So whenever I activate my ability, I do also cast to be sure that I'm the owner, like my character is the owner, and I double check that I do have a world. And well, that's basically what's gonna be done whenever you cast your ability. So I'm also checking that I do have like an animation instance, which is basically my anim blueprint. So if I do have an animation instance, okay, so whenever I do start a montage, I add this dynamic like a tack, and that's why I haven't used that um, custom class that it's already on. There we go. That's class. That's play montage and wait for event. You could do that on the blueprint side. You could just like type like play montage and wait for event, which is basically what's the purpose of that C++ class from the RPG system, which is basically allowing you to select the montage and playing and do everything on the blueprint side. But I wanted to give it a shot and try to do that on C++. So um, only level designer things are done into the blueprint, and code logic is mostly like handled through the C++. So instead of using that, I use the default play montage. And once I grab the animation instance, which is basically the anim blueprint, and whenever I start a montage, I attach a anim montage start, which is like a function that I created for, and the same I do for the animation end, which is those functions as well are again, as I did in the past for the untaken damage on the previous video, I just went ahead and find out. I just went. There you go. Where is it? Oh, it's on the top of it. Sorry, it went down. So basically, those events, if you click on it, you're gonna find the delegate for it, and you're gonna see what should be the what should be the inputs of each function in order to work. And the same goes for the unmontage end, which now it has two inputs. The bleeding out is also has the same sort of inputs. So that's how I created those two functions. And almost I started, it's what should I do whenever I start an animation montage. And the ending is whenever I end an animation montage, or bleeding out is whenever it's uh, ending the montage. It's like at the end of its life course. So whenever it's at the end of its life course, I'm gonna consider as ended already. Um, so basically, I'm calling this function on and it starts whenever I start it. So which is basically not allowing my player to dodge whenever because that's gonna be weird. If I'm punching someone, I should be able to dodge a punching because I'm already punching. There's no, you know, it's kind of difficult. Try yourself to punch something and roll over someone else. It's kind of impossible. It's gonna break your arm. Uh, so I set my player cannot dodge whenever he's trying to punch another player or casting an animation. He cannot dodge whenever he's casting an ability. I'm using the punches as an example because that's the only one that I created for. And whenever he's ending or bleeding out, then I'm setting the player to recover stamina because the punching is going to take some stamina from it. I'm going to show you in a couple seconds how it's going to do it. And I'm setting like, okay, recover automatic stamina. So each punch ability is going to take an amount of stamina, but the recovery player stamina is going to be happens automatically. So basically, it's going to set it up like a world timer. So and it's creating like an effect. And what's doing is setting the timer, and each 1 second, it's going to recover some sort of stamina for it. And whenever we already hit the amount of max stamina, we're just going to, clear the timer and um, stop recovering stamina. So it's basically what it's doing. It's just like doing a recursive call. And I'm going to explain in a couple seconds what are those effects and how you can create yourself. But basically, that's what it's doing at the top of it. So it's calling recover stamina, set the player to dodge whenever he finishes its animation, and whenever he finishes its animation, I'm calling this K2 end ability, which is basically calling this end ability function. But the difference is instead of calling end ability with all of those inputs, I don't kind of care for all of these inputs. So if you call on the blueprint and like end ability, for example, you're gonna see that you have this end ability without this any input, and that's how you could call it this node into C++, which is just call it K2 end ability, which is gonna basically call this end ability function. Okay, but okay, so whenever I activate it, I already set my dynamic binds to the montage sections of my onion blueprint. And based on that, if we can get the attributes and we're not punching already, and we have already enough stamina, then we're going to cast the skill itself. So I'm basically gathering the attributes to be sure that I do have attributes into my player. I'm gathering if the player can actually dodge because he might be casting a skill on top of the other skill, so he cannot cast any skill because he's doing already one. And I'm checking if the stamina it's above my threshold, which is basically the max stamina, which is basically like over 10% basically. So if all of those are true and I don't have any animation montage already playing, because otherwise it would stop one montage and play another, it's gonna be a bit weird. And if we're not have any montage playing, then we're gonna just play the montage, which is the ability montage that we set it up into that variable. And we're gonna disable the input as well, so the character cannot do anything while he cannot move forward. We disable the input basically, and we commit the ability. The commit ability again is what I said. It's what are gonna cause the cost of that ability to the character itself, but it can be called like commit ability. That's why it has this K2. It's because it doesn't care for any inputs, because if you look at and you the commit ability, it also has like a bunch of inputs. So whenever you want to call without caring about the inputs that are going to pass forward, you just can call K2 in the name of it, of the function itself. Otherwise, if he's not able to do anything, if he doesn't have any attributes, which means he cannot commit the ability, uh, if he cannot dodge, which means he already casting a skill, and if his stamina is not enough, he's just gonna end the ability right away. He's just gonna kill the ability and not doing anything. So that's how we deactivate ability for my abilities handling. It's just basically grabbing, checking if he has the amount of stamina required for it, which is basically above 10%. Checking if he's not casting one ability already, and he has uh, sorry, he has the attributes to actually commit that ability. The end ability, on the other hand, is remember I disable the input whenever I successfully cast the ability. So the end ability is actually gonna enable the input again for me. So whenever I finish casting an ability, I enable the input, so I allow the player to cast another ability or even move around again. Um, and if I do have an event task, which is basically, sorry, my throat's a little bit, uh, I have a little bit of sore throat, but never mind. So if I do have an event task already moving around of the ability, and it's valid because it's already, we haven't killed the ability already. So if that's valid, we want to be sure that we kill this event task, or we end that task. So yeah, that's basically what it's doing. Also, so it's basically just enable the input and ending the task if that has been ended already automatically by the UE4. The commit ability is not doing anything because remember, this is automatic. So whenever you set it up or your ability to use a specific attribute and you apply the specific effect, that effect is going to set like specify which is the cost. The effect is going to handle all the math for you. Uh, and the cancel ability is also not doing anything because we're not caring about any cancel right now. Okay, so that's the ability. So that's the default ability. So any ability that I have, basically, It's gonna disable the input and only enable at the end of it, and it's only gonna be able to cast if I have enough stamina and I'm not casting any other ability. That's basically what it's doing. I know it's a lot of code for it, but yeah, and also it's setting the default or a variable for the animation that's going to play based on the kind of weapon it is holding. Okay, so that's the ability. But if you open up the ability itself and you go for the class default, you're going to see that you do have like this cost section of it, which is basically, remember, I mentioned uh, the ability is going to control the source of it, but the calculations and everything behind it, it's going to be like all the damage dealt or uh, all the calculations, like what are the costs, what are the damage, is going to be handled by effects. And the effects you can specify by the gameplay effect class. I created like this stamina dropper hit, so it's like an effect, like a simple one. So you can see that it's a blueprint, but it's based on my custom. If you open up like as a full editor, you're gonna see that the class settings is like is a Giz effect. And if you open up the effect itself, it's based on the U gameplay effect. So you create like a custom class. I just set it up like a header for it, like a header, sorry, a constructor for it, and I set it up like the default duration to be instant, and the period value to be like to have no period. Like this should be the default, like just an effect that is applied once and it doesn't stay forever. So uh, you could do differently, but basically the effect is entirely easier to do everything through blueprints. So I can create this effect, and if you go to duration policy, you're gonna see that you do have like a modifier. And here is where you specify, you can add another one. It's gonna be empty for you. If you wanna your effect to, change multiple attributes of your character, you can specify multiple ones. But in my case, I just want one. I just want once. So this effect is called stamina dropper hit. So whenever I, call a punch, I'm gonna drop my stamina is gonna drop by some amount. So I set it up to drop my stamina. Okay, so basically it's grabbing my attribute stamina, and it's grabbing based on the attributes I set. So I set it up like stamina attribute. The modifier is going to be add, or you can multiply by 2 or whatever, divide it over it, but add. And if you go to the magnitude, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing like a scalable flow, which is basically like a float value. So whenever I hit call like a punch, it's going to drop minus, like it's going to add minus 10, which is basically subtracting minus 10 of my stamina. So if I open up my blueprint again, and again, those blueprints I just created by this like blueprint class, and since I do have my C++ class, I can just type gas, and I do have my gas gameplay ability, which is basically my C++ class. That's how I did it. I just named it afterwards. And the same goes for the effect. So I set it up, I need an effect, select over here, and on the effect, I set it up that this is gonna drop 10 of stamina for each punch I throw. So this is going to be the cost for this ability specific. You can add multiple costs as well. So you can drop not only stamina, you can drop mana, or you can drop whatever you want it to. But for this ability, which is a simple punch, I'm going to just drop the stamina itself. Um, and this is going to cost for the character that is casting. It's not what it's going to cause to the target for it. So cost is gonna what the target is like the enemy, and the owner, it's gonna cost something to trigger that ability. You don't need to have a cost, but in my case, I wanted the cost to be stamina. So if I play here and I open my console command, I show debug ability, oops, system. You can see that. Let me just see if I can make that a little bit bigger. I think that's gonna be bigger. There we go. So show debug ability system. You can see that, yeah, it's pretty small yet, but Let me see if I can open up the software that, yeah, there we go, point to fix. So you can see that here are each one of my attributes, basically, including the floating ones that I set it up. And you can see that I have 10 of strength. I have like 100 of max health or whatever. And I set it up this on the default constructor, but if you open up your character, let me just open up my character blueprint really quickly. And I search for attributes. I have my max health, max value of each one of those set it up over here. So that's how I set it up for the level designer to specify. That's why I set it up as a float, not as a gameplay attribute data over there, because otherwise it's just going to have the variables, but there would be no way of setting up that easily. But again, if I play it up and set show debug ability system, you're going to have over there my attributes. And if I punch, you're going to see that that attribute's going to drop. Oops, I think I'm in the console command. Okay. And if you punch, my stamina went to 90 and now it's getting up and up and up because it's recovering itself. So if I punch 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see that the stamina is dropping, but each 1 second is triggering like this increase of stamina. So it's kind of hard just decreasing by 10. You can punch a lot basically. So it's costing something. You can see that it's working because once I cast on my C++, whenever I successfully cast my ability, and I need to open my ability again, component ability, where is it? There we go. Whenever I successfully cast my ability, I do commit my ability. So this commit is basically going to grab that cost, a section of the effect, and apply whatever I set it up as the effect for the ability itself. So that's how you set it up effects. Basically, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Uh, okay, so but if you look it up, and I'm gonna present to you really quickly. If I punch it, a character, you're gonna see that he does have this sort of animation, and also you can see that I move forward a little bit each punch I give, and the same goes for the character that moves in the opposite direction, which is I think it's called knockback effect. I don't know how you guys call it, but uh, how I do that is if you open up like the effect itself, and let me just open up again, you're gonna see that below of it of the effect. Let me see if I can find it. Where is it in the ability? Okay, so I do have the ability trinket, their cooldowns, and etc. Okay, so the effect is being called, and basically what it's doing is it's triggering this animation blueprint, and you can see that each montage has this notify named punch montage, which is basically when I should apply the damage to the target. So basically, it's just playing the animation, and the damage itself is handled by this init notify. And whenever I finish, I call this reset attack, which is unneeded at this moment. But yeah, and I think I can even delete it later. But since I do reset the attack at the end of it of the montage on the C++ already, but at the beginning I was using Blueprint, so I had to reset the attack if every time the any montage finish. Okay, so this blueprint itself, let me just go back to the blueprint. It's also it's an init notify. So if I open up the C++ class, I created also an init notify C++ to handle all the math, like for the damage itself. So basically what it's going to do is going to have, let me just open up the header. I think it's going to be easier to explain. So if you open up here on the C++, you can create this through blueprints. But again, I mentioned all the logic I like to do in a C++, and things that are uh, level design ways, like a level design option, like what should be the particle, what should be the animation, whatever. I leave that to the editor, so the level design can specify those into the editor itself, not bothering at all with the programming logic behind. And also, it's a lot cheaper on the code side as well to do that on C++ than do mathing on blueprints. But basically, what I did is on the gameplay ability system folder, I've created this. Let me just find it. I think it's on the notify. Yeah, there we go. Inside of my character, I do have this abilities, name notify. I do have my melee modify, which is like UN name modify. So basically, what I did is I search for unnamed notify and I select the first one, and that was it. So basically, it's the same as if you were into Blueprint and you create like a blueprint named unnamed notify. It should be the same. But basically, what I do on this unnamed notify is if you see the code itself, there's nothing in it. But I set it up like for the level design to be able to set the trait, like what should be the knockback strength of both characters and anime, and the camera shake effect, which is basically like it's really not that noticeable, but there's like a small shake on the camera as well whenever I throw a punch. It's really like the detail, but the level designer can specify a different effect. What should be the trace radius, which is basically tracing on the hand socket, which is I specify here as well. And based on that radius, it's gonna grab whatever is around it, and it's gonna send a tag for me, which is health damage. So what it's gonna do is gonna send an event to my gameplay ability system, which I do here on whenever I activate the ability. I do wait for a gameplay event, which is basically set it up like to wait for a health damage event. And whenever that happens, I do apply that melee attack effect to whatever the target is. So what this is doing is basically on my unnamed notify, if I open up the notify itself, let me just open and those are blueprints that are, again, is editable through blueprints. I just set it up those variables over here. And I overrided the notify function, and based on what it's doing is casting to check if it's a character that I'm hitting. So if it's hitting a character, that's going to be the target. So I do not apply the target to anything else other than characters. You could apply that to like static meshes or destructibles or whatever. But for this sake of this tutorial, I'm just applying this to characters. So if I do have a reference, so, I mean, the owner is the owner is the character, which is basically us. And if I do have the owner and the owner also have a world, what I'm doing is I'm creating like a trace. And what it's doing is like just doing like this overlap actors trace. And it's grabbing the socket and whatever. And whatever it founds, it's going to save on this variable actor found. And it's going to ignore the owner, which is basically us. So it's going to ignore us. Uh, and basically what it's doing is applying this impulse strength to like the direction of the pulse is going to be the owner reference, the capsule component, like the front of the capsule component, multiply by whatever is the strength that the level design specifies. So if you specify like 1,000, 2,000, it's going to move even more forward. Basically, what it's doing now is for each one of the overlap actors found, it's going to create this target handle, which is basically, how can I explain that? Is the like it's creating this. Let me just find here on the create something like this, but let me see if I can find that to be a lot easier. Basically, ability target for actor is like a blueprint variable that you can see that ability target from actor. There we go. So it's creating this node. It's creating like this return value to set it up as the target for this variables. Okay, so that's what I'm doing on C++. I'm creating this target for that overlap vector to set it up what should be the event to send. Uh, the event data, I'm set it up like an empty one because I don't need it. The instigator is the owner, which is basically the character that's triggering the punch. The target is whatever the actor is overlapping at the moment, which should be this overlap actor. The target data is whatever I created, like that target data from actor, which is basically over here, which is just what I created based on the overlap actor. And I am sending this gameplay event to actor, which is basically this send gameplay event to actor. So I need to specify an event tag, which at this point they specify the health and damage, which is basically the target, the tags to send specify on this point here. So it's gonna send that. The gameplay event data is gonna be basically everything that I just built with the reference, what should be the actor, and what should be the target to apply. And the owner reference, which is basically the one that is actually applying that event. And if I do have an enemy, which means like I'm only applying that to an enemy, like this is only applying to enemies. So if I do have an enemy, based on the overlap actor, what I'm doing is I am adding the knockback effect. So there's no point of applying knockback effect from on a wall or maybe an object might be, but I'm just adding the impulse if I do have an actor. Basically, the knockback effect only makes sense for me to an actor, to a character. Sorry. So if I do have an enemy character, I am applying the knockback effect, which is basically adding an impulse, doing the same thing as above, but based on the character movement at an impulse. And that should be about it. Also, I'm calling the camera shake here. So the owner, I'm also, well, I'm not only applying the knockback effect to the character, I'm applying, pushing the character a little bit forward as well in the same proportion as the punch and as the enemy. And I'm also grabbing the gameplay controller, and I'm playing the camera shake, and that should be about it. And I'm doing this before the super. It could be above below it, but after, but whatever. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm making a trace, and based on that trace, I'm calculating what should be the strength of the knockback effect and the impulse direction of my character. And for each one of the overlap actors that I found, I'm gonna send the event health damage, which is basically applying damage to it. And based on that, I'm setting up the tags to send. And if the overlapping actor is an actual character, I'm also gonna apply a knockback effect to it, and I'm gonna move my character a little bit forward based on that, and apply a camera shake. You could do that on blueprints as well, but I found it a bit easier to just specify to the level designer all the parameters that he wanted to, where he wanted to start a trace, what should be the radius of that trace, what should be the camera straight. Like it's a lot simpler for a level designer to just bother about aesthetics than gameplay or whatever it might dirty his his view. And then what I did was basically I am on that. I created this on the ability system whenever he activated on the, and I didn't found like a good way of linking that to C++. I would love to if you guys have any way of doing that, but I found a way of starting the work, but I haven't found a way of reliably linking those event receive and DSX is basically right after calling it, but the event receive I haven't found like a reliable way of linking that through C++ code. So if you found that out, just hit me up and that might be useful. I might convert that to C++ as well because um, I don't like coding logic to be into what should be level designer work, dirty work. I mean, it might be a bit confused by looking to it. So basically, what I did is whenever I receive that event, I wait for that event to happen whenever I activate the ability, and he waits for the health damage event, and I set it up that and to that war wait event task. So whenever remember that we have this on the ability, we ended up the task but we never set it up that task in the first place. That's where we set it up that task, which is after we create the ability, we set that event gameplay event task to our variable, and that becomes valid. So whenever we receive the event, that's gonna grab the payload, and the payload is gonna have like all that basic information from our pinch damage notify that we built. So it's basically gonna have all of this information into it, this gameplay event data, and this is gonna be the payload, and we set it up to apply an effect to the character, to the target itself, and the target is gonna be our gameplay event data, which is basically like our target, which is basically the overlap actor or actors. And what is going to be the effect that it's going to apply? It's going to apply these effect, which is melee attack damage effect. And again, similar to what we have to the drop per hit effect, we're going to have the melee attack, but differently. It's going to be instant as well, but it's going to change the health only. And the health is, let me just, is adding as well, but the magnitude is attribute based, which means that the amount of health that's going to be decreased of the character itself, it's based on the, let me just found the attribute base that I used. Oh, there we go. So it's based on the character's strength. So if my character has 10 strength, it's going to decrease. I put it -1 because I don't want to increase the enemy. Since it's adding, I put -1 because it's going to be multiplied by -1 the value. So it's going to grab the character's strength, and it's gonna subtract that from whatever the target is. So if my character strength is 10, it's gonna decrease 10 of the enemy's health. If my character strength is 20, it's gonna decrease 20. So it's gonna be based on my character strength only. So that's also a good way of doing it. Is instead of setting up uh, setting up like constant values over here like 10, so this way you can make your game more granular. So based on the evolution of your character, based on the upgrades that you put into your character, your strength is going to be higher, so your character is going to be stronger, and you're going to need to have stronger enemies in order to balance your game a little bit. So that's how it's going to work. uh, there's no tag, there's nothing in it, so there's no source tags or whatever. Let me see if I can find. Oh, there we go. Though on each effect, and remember, whenever I play, the notify is just moving the character or the enemy, putting the knockback effect. Though I am never, and you can see that I had never informed that the enemy should be playing this animation. Or maybe I would like to spawn like a blood uh, particle or whatever. And this can be done by the gameplay cues, which is basically the visual effect of this whole gameplay ability system. Of course, some may say that the montage is already like a visual effect, and I agree with it. But uh, I would say that particles, sounds, and animations, those are also part. Well, animations already is part of the montage, but yeah, this is handled by the gameplay cues. More should be handled by the gameplay cues more often. So if you go to the game, like under the gameplay effects section, you're gonna have the display down below, and you can see that you have like gameplay cues, and you can see that there's no place where I specify this gameplay cue like hit reaction or anything of the sort, but I specify like a tag to be gameplay cue hit reaction, and you can see that doesn't present the other tags because uh, this is like a gameplay queue tag. So whenever you enable to your gameplay ability system, you're gonna see that there's like this gameplay queue editor where you can specify new tags and even creating already handlers or uh, gameplay queue blueprints for it. I created mine in C++, and you can see that if you click here, it's gonna open up for you. But if you open up that window again and you want to create like a new one, let's suppose you create like a new one, like gameplay queue, whatever you wanted to, like, I don't know, stamina, slower, whatever. And you can comment over here, and you're gonna need like a new tag, and you're gonna present to you like add a new gameplay queue notify static or gameplay queue notify actor. And remember, uh, this is gonna create under your game, like under GC, it's gonna have like under the game folder. I don't like to do it that way. I would like to just create the tags over here. And whenever I want to create like a gameplay queue, I can just go back to my queues and open the queues section. I rather just go to Blueprint class and find my custom gameplay queue with timer, which is basically if I want to like a like a effect, a longer effect to either enemy or the character, like that should like should do did that effect for a couple seconds or should stay for a couple seconds, or I can just hit like this as an animation. It's just an instant one. I can just create that one. And how do you link that into that editor is just basically under the gameplay queue itself. You can specify the tag as this one, for example. And if I specify that way and I open up that window again, you're going to see that it just switch it. That's how you specify that. So you link that through the tags itself. I rather link that way than because I like to create my custom ones than doing manually just creating like because you're gonna need to create like the default gameplay queues, and if you wanted to create like a custom event in C++ down the line, you won't be able to because those are blueprints. Though that way you can specify some custom informations on C++ later, like this hit reaction as I specify on my own. So if I open up my gameplay queue, not the timer one, but the queue instant, you can see that I created this variable named what should be the montage, like the hit reaction montage, and I can specify what should be the montage to play. The tag needs to match exactly the one on the effect. So it's just a matter of telling to the display section of the gameplay effect what should be the visual effect of that uh, effect itself. And whenever that effect is triggered, it's gonna try to match exactly with whatever gameplay cue you already have in your game. And basically, what I did here is I just let me just open up here. I didn't do anything on the C++, at least not just yet, because I found that right now, since I'm prototyping things, I like to do that way because it seems a lot more simpler to prototype than later. I just um, move over to C++ whenever I need it. So basically, I just override a function here named on execute. You have like a couple other ones. All of those functions you can override as well in C++, but again, it's just prototyping. So I cast the character itself, and if the player is alive, and again, this is a function that I created on my player, like it's a getter, like a blueprint peer function. So if I open up my character here really quickly, let me just open. Oh, I open up the wrong file. Let me open the header. So if I go back to player, there we go. So you can see that I do have like a forcing line function name. It's blueprint pure, which is basically this blueprint pure. Okay, that's a lot more English. So basically, what it's doing is just returning my bees live function. So that's how it's gonna look like, and it even has this comment whenever you mouse over because the way you comment the function itself, you put like those two asterisks, it's gonna um, it's gonna put that comment into the blueprint function, which is pretty cool. So if my player is alive, or which is basically like the target, not my player, but the target of that uh, effect, which should be like the enemy. If that player is alive, and if it's a character, and if it's alive, what I'm doing is I'm playing a montage, and the montage I'm playing is whatever the level design is specified, and that should be about it. And I'm just closing it up like as a like I'm just finishing as a success. I would like to put that as well, just in case I'm not hitting like any character, but I would like to kill this gameplay queue whenever I trigger it. So that's how you put effect like visual effects into either character or into the screen. Whenever you do that, that's gonna wait for that tag and event to be sent, And there we go. That's basically it. And whenever he hits to the point that he gets less than like his dead, well, then my animation blueprint is gonna say, okay, disable the input or whatever. You can, do your thing, just grabbing the character whenever you're sending, for example. What I did basically is on my attributes. Let me just go back to the attributes class. Where is it? My attributes class. Game pre attributes. Let me just open that way. Okay. So whenever I set the health attribute, uh, well, if the health is minus or equal to 0, then I'm setting the player is alive to false, which means the player is killed. Either it's me or it's an enemy or whatever. And basically, if I open up my blueprint, my animation blueprint, which is also in C++, but let me just open up my characters, playable, and in blueprint. You can see that in the event graph, there's nothing in it because all of those is handled through C++. It's a C++ class. So if you open up my uh, characters playable, you're gonna have this and festival anim instance. So it's basically an anim instance class. So if you open up this class over here, it's just a new anim instance class. So if you new class, instead of creating like an animation blueprint, I created this anim instance class, name it whatever I wanted to, and inside of my anim instance, I do have this constructor and this native update animation, which is basically whenever you open your anim blueprint. Let me just open up the anim blueprint. Let me open the UE4 anim blueprint to make it simple to present to you guys. Let me just try to open that animation blueprint. Okay. So if you open up that animation blueprint, you're gonna see that you have this blueprint update animation, and that node in C++ is called native update animation. That's basically it. But I just overriding that, and I'm doing all my logic that usually the uh, UE4 does on Blueprint for beginners and for everyone that usually do animation blueprint. I do that on C++ because depending on the complexity you want to get to your game, that may become a little bit heavier, and I do like to make calculations. And doing that on C++ is a lot cheaper to the engine itself. I do have my properties for the whenever I needed to modify something on the animation blueprint, like player reference, weapon being used, speed is alive, and this is alive is basically based on that is alive variable on my character, if he's on the middle of the air, if his casting skill or whatever. And I do have also these update animation properties, which is basically getting the velocity or whatever. And what's doing is on that native node, what it's doing is casting to the character, and this is basically this try get Paul Warner. So it's basically the same thing. I'm setting this as a reference, and if that's true, that means I can update my animation with my animation variables that I use for the animation, like speed, if the character is in the air, if he's alive, and this is gathering that variable that I just set it before, and what kind of weapon I'm using. And yeah, that's basically if I'm resetting the attack, I'm setting the player that he can dodge through. Remember that I have that variable on that notify on each animation blueprint, but it's kind of useless right now because I do that on C++ on the gameplay ability directly. But yeah, anyways, I do have these do once whenever I want to, because there are some sort of things that I like to call this node like do once, and I haven't found a good way of doing that on C++, so I kind of have this function, and if I need to do once, I needed to reset it. That's how I do it basically. Not that I need it right now, but I like to have it set it. So if I do something, it's gonna do once, unless I reset the do once, which is basically this. So yep, that's basically what it's doing. And similarly to the animation blueprints, I do have my states. Like this is the basic state, like the basic idle, the diff, and those are all updated based on if he's alive, he's gonna present the diff. If he is not, if he goes from he's alive to revive, like a respawn or something of the sort, is going to be to revive, which is basically this animation of his getting up. And I do that for basically even like all sorts. So whenever I set that variable is alive to false, it's gonna go to that basic state, and it's gonna call the animation diff, which is basically that animation that you saw, basically. So yep, that's basically animation blueprints, which is not the point of this video. We can cover that if you wanted later into into different videos. But basically, based on the weapon being used, he's using like basic, or he's using like an archer, or dual blades for the shield, or whatever, mage state, or whatever. Not that I have uh, uh, this all coded, but I would like to have at least like the animation blueprint already set up. So that's how you kill the character, and you can see that it's applying. I need to give 10 punches to kill it. So 2, 3, because I have 10, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 punches, and he's dead. That means that my uh, effect of the attack damage is actually working based on my strength attribute. So if I open up my character and I change my max strength to 20 instead of 10, and that, remember, that set it up on my attributes. So if I open up again, my strength starts up with the value that I set it up as a max strength. On that case, I set it up as 20. So now I need to give 5 punches, if I'm not mistaken on my math. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 punches, and oops. Oh, he's not applying. What is my basic strength? Let me just show. Show debug, abilities, system. Oh, my strength is still 10. Okay, so it's not applying this modification that I did. Maybe a hot reload? I don't know. Let me just... Maybe it's a hot reload issue. Let me save it and start all over to see if it's gonna save it, because it's not saving as 20 as I set it up to. Maybe it's a hot reload issue. Let me just start all over. Oops, it's taking too long to compile. Okay. So yeah, okay, it's compiling now. Let's see if it's starting with 20 now. Show debug ability system. Strength is it's already 10. Sorry, not sure why. Okay, I need to debug this later, but basically that's how it works. Player character. Let's open up. It's 20. I'm not sure why it's not setting that up. Okay, but let's suppose you want to change that somehow. Let's just begin play or whatever. Get attributes. Set max. There's only the getters? Okay, I need to set it up, maybe a way of setting that up. But basically, that's how you would do it based on the stamina. It's just because there's a bug here. I'm not sure why it's not setting up the max stamina as 20. I need to debug that later. But yeah, that's how you set it up. That basically based on the attributes. So since my attribute is saved as 10, it's setting up that as 10. So I need to give 10 punches. I need to find a way of setting up that 20 value, because that was the whole intention of this, of setting this up that way. Otherwise, there's no point of change that, to expose that to this way. Maybe I need to use a data table later. But yeah, again, but now how do I give this punch ability to my character? That's because I have this default ability, as I mentioned before. Let me just find the melee ability. There we go. I do have this variable named blueprint really only, like edit defaults only, as its ability, and this is the class for like a default class from my UGAS gameplay ability, and I saved as melee ability. And here I can set it up that simple attack blueprint, which is based on that gas gameplay ability class as my default attack. So my default ability to set it up, and on my character itself, on my functions, whenever I give the ability, let me just go back to the default, the game setup gameplay. Let me just go back. Again, I set it up the input here. It's setting up the input. This input is based on the input that I give here, which is punch. And in order for that to work, you need to have a input with the same name. So you go to the project settings, input. Let me just find it. Input with the same and exact name. And whenever the key you set it up here, it's gonna trigger that ability. The ability matching with that. And on the begin play, before after initializing the ability system component, I do use this give ability function. So what this is doing is grabbing the component and it's giving the class melee ability to it as a default ability. So if you want to do like some sort of skill tree in the future, you may need to have multiple classes, not multiple variables that way, but you need to have multiple classes, multiple gameplay ability classes set up. Might be blueprints, might be C++ classes, whatever you wanted to. And then you just need to call it give abilities and give the pointer to that ability specific. It could be like a subclass. So basically, you can create maybe a data table with lots of abilities and what should be the requirements for each one of the maybe let's suppose like a sorcerer, like a magician, like a mage class. He wants to give the default ability as I don't know, fireball. Maybe that's the melee combo out of it. But then in order to have the next ability, which I don't know, spawn, maybe cast another enemies or control mines you need to have uh, the fireball active. So you can control that by on your ability system. You have the stag. Let me just find. This is the ability. So there you go. You can have the source require tags. You can use that. So in order to activate that ability, you have to have maybe some other tags here already into your character. Uh, or you can set it up that into your data table somehow, like, oh, only activate that if, I don't know, you can have, for example, in my case, what I'm going to do in the future is I do have this similar to what we have for the armor set items that I'm gonna have it. I'm gonna have like a TRA variable of gas ability systems or something like that, and I'm only gonna allow this function give ability to be called whenever an ability before is already inside of that array. If it's not inside of that array, I'm not gonna allow the ability to be given, basically. So similar to what skill tree works. So you have the basic ability, which is the punch or melee ability, and above you want to upgrade. In order to upgrade, you need to have inside of your array of abilities that ability in there already. Or in order to upgrade to the above one, you need to have the below one inside of the array. So that's how I'm gonna do it. I'm not sure if that's the best way, but that's how I'm gonna do it. Or you can use those require tags. So whenever you're only gonna spawn that if you already have that amount of tags spawned somewhere inside of your level. But I think that's a bit troublesome. But like activation require tags, yeah, I think that's gonna become like a lot of tags on top of the other tags, and it might become a lot confusing confused uh, to level designers to work with. But yeah, that's how you would set it up gameplay abilities. And for testing specifically on the session front end, again, I do have also unit tests for it, like cast, unit tests, attributes. Since I don't have any magic points, those tests are going to fail. Since I haven't implemented that, you can see that it's going to fail. Though the health tests, like if I can kill the player, probably it's going to pass because I check that I can, decrease the player value, and I can kill it. I check that I can decrease and apply like a tired effect to the player itself. I also check like unit testing if that I can change the fall attributes never negative and never over the max allowed. So you can see that there are unit tests for those. And also on the functional test side of it, because since some of these gameplay ability system uh, attributions are, at least it feels like they're built to be on blueprints, at least more user friendly for not only people that handle C++, but also, more user broadly for level designers or something like that. They might not be so familiar with C++ or any coding language. They might be able to use that just by setting up the component and that integrate like that, setting up the attributes and the components into the player character, and then later doing everything on blueprints. So we feel like it was built to be user friendly that way. So for end-to-end tasks like testing that you can actually cast a skill or apply damage or anything of the sort, most of that needs to be tested at least once and the end-to-end level. So I do have this project settings, functional testing. I do have this test that I check that I can apply a damage to a character, like, and that I can decrease the stamina after calling that punch ability. And since that's an end-to-end test, I kind of don't care. I explained last time that you can also write end-to-end tests on C++ as well, but uh, I kind of don't care actually for end-to-end tests on C++, at least for this specific component, because uh, since most of it's already built in blueprints, why not testing in blueprints? I mean, of course, it's going to be difficult to maintain that depending on how big the project is. But since this is a standalone project that only I'm going to work with right now, since it's just a simple project, I just created like two blueprint testing for it. So I created like a game mode test, which is basically set it up like the default pawn class to none. Otherwise, you would spawn every time I try to play every time I try to run a functional test, it's gonna spawn like two players, the one that is on the map and that uh, the one that is on the map and the one that it should spawn by default. So let me just open up like a map test, for example, like map dev test. Let's hope this is stamina test, for example. So if I want to play, I don't have anyone to spawn because this is a task map. So it's not going to spawn anything. So my view, it's going to be pretty. And again, as we did in the last time for C++, it's just a matter of setting what the character reference, what should be doing. And, the test itself is pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. So you can create that onto blueprints as well. So you can find functional tests here. There we go. That's the same way you did it for blueprints. But the difference is whenever you open up the test, uh, when you start the test, you're going to do something, and then you tick in the same way in the same way we did the last time. I'm going to check if something, finishes or not, and then basically quitting the game and finishing the test. Basically, what this is doing is it's grabbing the reference, which is basically the character reference I set, and it's trying to activate an ability by class. And the ability that I'm trying to activate is the GA simple attack, which is basically the melee attack. And if that activates successfully, I'm gonna fix. If that doesn't activate successfully, I'm gonna fail the task because I have been unable to cast the skill. And again, that's only gonna be able to activate because on the begin play of my character, I set it up. On the begin play of my character, I've set it up that to give that ability by default. So be careful. If you don't give the ability, it's not going to activate, so that's going to fail. So maybe you need to mock something else to be able to either in C++ or Blueprint mock something else to your character in order to provide that ability to test to him. Like give maybe you should uh, probably like give ability before it, like find a way of giving ability. Oops. Yeah, there's a way of doing it. I'm just not finding on the test level, at least on other blueprints. But I know that you can call this give ability function. Oh yeah, it's because you need to on the header you need to set the interface to it. So maybe you need to in the class default add an interface to it as well. On your test level in C++, add this interface for your test as well in order to have those give ability functionalities here. Just be sure that you have that ability. And then if it doesn't cast, it's going to fail and quit the game. It failed the test. And if it casts, it's going to grab the stamina, set that to a variable like stamina after the effect. And on the tech, it's just going to wait until your stamina after the effect is less than the actual stamina. So it's actually recovering stamina after hitting the player or doing something else. So yeah, that's basically what it's going to do to stats, and the same goes for the damage. The damage is similar to the other one, which is just going to move the player around until here. And again, just don't forget to set your game mode test as your, the game modes for your levels. So you just need to go to word settings. I'm just trying to find that out here. Where's the world settings? World settings, where is it? I remember seeing that somewhere here. Oh, settings, okay. Here, world settings, there we go. And so set your game mode test so you don't spawn a player anywhere whenever you're testing your code, and move your test, functional test to the level, and then just trigger the test. And that should be about it. Move the player, pass, and it was pretty quickly, but he actually gave a punch, and after 1 second, after a few seconds, milliseconds, they recovered the stamina right away. And that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and see you next time.